"Every woman in this territory has knocked on your door," she said, standing soaked and half-frozen in his doorway, looking Cole Mercer dead in the eye. "I'm not here to be your wife. I'm not here for your money. I'm here because I'm going to die in that storm if you close this door, and I think you already know that." She didn't beg. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, one woman against the coldest man in Montana, and waited. Cole hadn't moved in 6 years. He moved now. He stepped aside, and nothing was ever the same again. If this story already has you hooked, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The morning Cole Mercer turned away the governor's daughter, he did it without raising his voice. Margaret Aldrich had traveled 3 days from Helena in a private coach. She arrived wearing green silk and pearl earrings, carrying a letter of introduction signed by 2 senators and her own father, who controlled nearly half the territory's banking interests. She was 24 years old, educated in Boston, fluent in French, and considered the finest match in all of Montana Territory. Cole met her in the front hall, looked at the letter, looked at her, and handed the letter back. "Miss Aldrich," he said, "I'm sure you're everything that letter says you are. But I'm not what you're looking for, and you're not what I need. I'll have Thomas drive you back to the station." Margaret stared at him. "Mr. Mercer, my father." "Your father," Cole said quietly, "made an arrangement without asking either of us. I appreciate the gesture. The answer is no." He walked back toward his office and didn't turn around. That was the 14th woman in 4 years. The story spread fast, the way all stories spread in a territory where winter gives people too much time and too little distraction. Cole Mercer, wealthiest cattle baron in the northern frontier, owner of Blackstone Ridge, 40,000 acres of the most productive rangeland in Montana, had rejected another one. A governor's daughter, no less. The man was arrogant. The man was impossible. The man had a cold black stone where his heart used to be. That's what they said. Cole had heard every version of it. He didn't argue with any of them. It was easier to let people believe the comfortable story than explain the true one. His foreman, a grizzled veteran named Hank Briggs, waited until the coach was out of sight before he said anything. Hank had been running cattle alongside Cole since the early days before the money, before the mansion, before the reputation that made men tip their hats and women lower their eyes. He was the only man on the ranch who talked to Cole like a human being instead of a legend. "That one had fire in her eyes," Hank said. "Different from the others." "They all have fire in their eyes," Cole said, "until they find out what this life actually costs. Then the fire goes real fast. You never give them the chance to prove otherwise." Cole stopped walking. He turned around slowly and looked at Hank with the expression that made ranch hands suddenly remember they had urgent business elsewhere. But Hank Briggs had seen that expression 1,000 times and had learned long ago to stand his ground through it. "I give them exactly what they're looking for," Cole said. "A door. Most of them came in through a window anyway, sent by fathers and politicians who think Blackstone Ridge is a prize to be won at a card table. I'm not a prize, Hank. And this ranch isn't a dowry." Hank looked at him for a long moment. "Cole," he said finally, "it's been 6 years. The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds, which between these two men was a very long silence. "I know how long it's been," Cole said, and he walked away. Hank watched him go and shook his head slowly. He'd had some version of this conversation 12 times over the past 4 years. It always ended the same way. Cole walking back toward the house, that massive echoing structure he'd built to hold a family that never came, and closing the door behind him with exactly enough force to communicate that the subject was finished. The house itself told the story, if you knew how to read it. Cole had built Blackstone Ridge's main residence in 1882, the year he turned 30, and the year his cattle operation crossed into genuine wealth. He'd built it large, deliberately large. 6 bedrooms, a dining room that seated 20, a wraparound porch on 3 sides, a kitchen designed for a woman who loved to cook for crowds, a library he'd stocked himself carefully with books he thought a family might love. He'd been building it for someone specific, though he would have denied that then and would deny it still. Her name had been Clara Whitfield. She'd been the school teacher in Billings, the daughter of a railroad engineer, educated and sharp and utterly unlike anyone Cole had ever known. She'd loved the land. She'd ridden with him across the open range and laughed into the wind and told him once, lying in the grass watching the stars, that she thought this was the most honest kind of living. Working with your hands, building something real, answering to the earth instead of to men in expensive suits. He'd believed her. They'd planned a wedding for the spring of 1881. Cole had finished the house in a fever of work through that winter, driving his crew 16 hours a day, choosing every beam and every window himself. He'd wanted it perfect. He'd wanted her to see it and feel what he felt every time he looked across his land, that this was home. That this was worth everything. Clara came out to see the finished house on a February morning 2 months before the wedding date. She walked through every room. She said all the right things. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and folded her hands and told him that she loved him, but she couldn't live this way. That the frontier was fine for a season and fine for a dream, but she was a real woman with real needs, and she needed a real city. She needed society. She needed to be somewhere that a person could grow, could rise, could be something beyond a rancher's wife at the edge of the known world. She offered him a compromise: sell the ranch, move to Chicago or Denver, invest the money in something respectable. He'd have everything she needed. They could still have a wonderful life. Cole sat with that proposal for a full minute without speaking. Then he said, "This ranch is my life, Clara. This land is who I am. I can't sell it any more than I can sell my own name." She looked at him with something that might have been grief, if grief came quiet and certain like that. "Then I think we want different lives," she said. She was gone by the end of the week. Cole locked the door to the master bedroom 2 days after she left. He didn't open it again for 6 years. He moved himself into a smaller room in the back of the house, purely functional. No sentiment, just a cot and a desk and a window facing the stables. He threw himself into work with the kind of focused aggression that either destroys a man or makes him a legend. In Cole's case, it made him both. Blackstone Ridge doubled in size, then doubled again. His cattle operation became the most efficient in the territory. He hired the best hands, built the best infrastructure, and negotiated the best contracts with every railroad moving beef east. By 1887, he was worth more than most men could count, and he felt none of it. Wealth without purpose is just a number, and Cole Mercer had stopped being able to identify any purpose that reached beyond the edge of his property line. He woke every morning before dawn. He worked until the light died. He ate alone. He went to bed and stared at the ceiling for a while, then slept for 5 hours and started again. That was his life in the winter of 1887. That was his life the night the storm came. The blizzard arrived without proper warning, which was not unusual for Montana in December, but this one was particularly vicious. It dropped 16 inches overnight and showed no sign of stopping. The temperature fell so far below zero that the ranch's older water pipes began groaning, and Cole had his men working through the early evening hours to reinforce the weak points before everything froze solid. He'd just come inside, coat still heavy with snow, when Hank appeared in the hallway with an expression Cole hadn't seen on him in years. Not alarm exactly. Hank Briggs didn't alarm easily, but something close to uncertainty. "There's someone at the east gate," Hank said. "One of the night hands found them about an hour ago." "Found who?" "A woman. Alone. On foot." Cole stopped pulling off his coat. "On foot in this?" "Yes, sir." "Where's her horse?" "No horse. No wagon. Nothing. She was walking along the road toward the ridge, and she went down in the snow. Danny Martinez found her by accident, nearly walked right past her. He brought her up to the gatehouse to warm up, but she's in bad shape, Cole. Cold through and cold through. She says she's been walking since before dark." Cole thought about that. The East Road was 12 miles from the nearest town. 12 miles in a blizzard at night in December on foot. He couldn't imagine the desperation that would put a person on that road in those conditions. "Bring her to the house," he said. "Already done. She's in the kitchen. Mrs. Calloway's trying to get some soup into her, But the woman keeps saying she doesn't want to be a burden and trying to stand up, and Mrs. Calloway's trying to push her back down, and frankly, it's a situation. Cole pulled his coat back on and walked to the kitchen. She was sitting at the long wooden table, trying as Hank had described to stand up. Mrs. Calloway, the ranch's cook, and the closest thing Blackstone Ridge had to a house manager, had both hands on the woman's shoulders and was using her considerable authority to prevent this. "You will sit," Mrs. Calloway was saying in her tone that had silenced rowdy ranch hands for 15 years, "until you have had something hot, and I have had a look at those hands. I appreciate your kindness, ma'am, I truly do, but I don't want to impose on—" The woman stopped talking when Cole walked in. She was perhaps 30. Maybe younger, it was hard to tell through the windburn and exhaustion that had settled into every line of her face. Her coat was wool practical and worn and far too light for this weather. Her hair was dark and had come loose during what must have been hours of exposure. Her hands, which Mrs. Calloway had been trying to examine, were wrapped in cloth that Cole recognized as torn fabric from her own coat's lining. She'd improvised protection for her hands with pieces of her own clothing. She looked at Cole with eyes that were tired down to their foundations, but completely steady. She didn't look away. She didn't shrink. She looked at him with the directness of someone who has run completely out of pretense because survival has burned it all away. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "my name is Evelyn Hart. I'm sorry to appear at your door this way. I had no intention of trespassing on your property. Your man was kind enough to bring me inside before I—" She stopped, reconsidered the sentence. "Before the cold got the better of me. If you'll allow me an hour to warm up, I'll be on my way, and no more trouble to anyone." "On your way where?" Cole asked. A pause. "Forward," she said. "Forward where specifically?" Something moved through her expression, not quite embarrassment, and not quite pain. "I'm traveling west. I have some things to settle and places to be." "In a blizzard?" The blizzard was unexpected. Cole looked at her hands. "Those injuries need proper attention." "They're fine." "They're not fine. Mrs. Calloway." He looked at the cook. "Get Dr. Reeves over from the bunkhouse." He looked back at Evelyn. "You'll stay until the storm breaks. Then we'll talk about forward." Evelyn opened her mouth. "Mrs. Hart," Cole said quietly, "I'm not offering you charity. I'm telling you that sending a person back into that storm tonight would be something I'm not willing to do. There's a difference. Drink the soup." She looked at him for a moment, studying him, Cole realized, with the same directness he'd used on her. She wasn't intimidated. She was evaluating. "Thank you," she said, and she drank the soup. Cole stood there a moment longer than was necessary, then turned and walked out before he could examine why. That night he didn't sleep well. He told himself it was the storm, the way a bad blizzard makes an old house settle and groan the way the wind finds every gap and makes itself heard. That was all. He lay in his small back room and listened to the house around him, and tried not to think about the fact that there was another person inside it. A real person. Not a visitor performing courtesy, not a daughter playing a role assigned by her father, not an applicant for a position they'd both pretend wasn't a transaction. Just a woman in real trouble who'd looked him dead in the eye and said the word forward like it was a destination that didn't need explaining. He woke at 4 a.m. and went to check the stables. On his way back through the house, he passed the kitchen. The light was on. He stopped in the doorway. Evelyn Hart was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, both hands wrapped now in proper bandaging, courtesy of Dr. Reeves, and she was reading. She'd found one of the books from the library, an old history of the Western Territories that had been sitting on the shelf for years. She read the way some people do when they're genuinely interested rather than passing time with her full attention, a slight furrow between her brows, occasionally mouthing a word. She hadn't heard him. Cole stood there for about 5 seconds. Then he took a single step forward, and the floorboard announced him with a loud creak, and her head came up immediately. No flinching, no dramatic startling, just attention redirected. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I'm sorry I should have gone back to the room. Why are you up at this hour?" "Couldn't sleep." She said it simply. No apology in it. Just fact. I didn't want to bother anyone, and there were books. Cole leaned against the doorframe and looked at her. How are the hands? Better. Dr. Reeves knows his work. She paused. He also told me you sent for him at 11 o'clock at night, during a blizzard, and that you pay his wages and half the church fund in town. I don't think he'd tell me that unless he thought I should know something about you. Reeves talks too much. He speaks well of you. She held his gaze. That's rarer than you'd think. Cole said nothing. He pushed off the doorframe, went to the stove, and poured himself coffee from the pot that stayed warm through the night. He stood at the counter with his back to her for a moment. Then he turned around. Where did you come from? He asked, and I mean that practically. Where did your journey start? A pause just long enough to be deliberate. Nebraska, she said. That's a long way to be traveling alone in December. Yes. What happened to your horse and your wagon? The wagon broke an axle 3 days ago. I sold the horse to a family outside of Billings who needed one more than I did. I had enough to get me to the next stage station, but the stage was full, and the storm came before the next one. You could have waited in Billings. I needed to keep moving. Cole looked at her. What are you running from, Mrs. Hart? The question landed cleanly in the silence. No hostility in it, just directness. The same directness she'd used on him. She looked at her cup. Who says I'm running? A woman traveling alone in December across Montana territory on foot isn't traveling for pleasure, Cole said. She's either going toward something or away from something, and since you told me you don't know exactly where you're going, that narrows it. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, then she looked up. You're perceptive. I've survived a long time in a territory that doesn't forgive you for missing what's actually happening. She considered that. I'm going towards something, she said finally. It just doesn't have an exact address yet. That's a careful answer. It's an honest one. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the storm was still going strong, the wind pressing against the walls with steady insistence. The kitchen clock read 10 minutes past 4. He'd been awake since before that, and would be working by 5, regardless, because the cattle didn't care what time a man went to bed. Go back to sleep, he said. Or keep reading. Either way, you don't need my permission to be in this room. He refilled his coffee and headed for the door. Mr. Mercer. He stopped. Why did you agree to take me in? She asked. I've heard the stories. You don't take people in. You don't give interviews. You don't host visitors. Your men all say you run a tight ship in a closed house. Cole turned around slowly. I have a rule, he said. Nobody dies on my property for lack of a warm room. That's all it is. Evelyn looked at him steadily. Is it? He didn't answer that. He walked back to his office and sat behind his desk and stared at the ledgers that needed his attention and didn't look at them for a long time. The storm didn't break the next morning. Cole had his hands dealing with frozen water troughs, a section of fence that had come down under the weight of accumulated ice, and 2 horses that had gotten spooked in the night and needed settling. He moved through all of it with the focused efficiency that had made Blackstone Ridge what it was, giving orders with the economy of a man who didn't feel the need to explain himself. He was out by the stables at noon when he heard a voice he didn't expect. One of the younger hands. Billy Marsh, barely 19, still in that stage of ranch work, where everything is either exhilarating or terrifying, and not much in between, had gotten his rope tangled badly around a fence post, and was making the situation worse with every attempt to fix it. He was this close to real frustration, Cole could tell, and Billy, in frustration, had a habit of making hasty decisions that created bigger problems. Standing next to him, talking him through it with calm, clear instructions, was Evelyn Hart. She was wearing a borrowed coat, one of the older ones from the hook by the back door, and her bandaged hands were still awkward, but she was demonstrating with her wrists and forearms how to release the tension properly, showing Billy the mechanical logic of the tangle instead of just pulling at it blindly. Don't fight it, she was saying. It's not fighting you. The rope doesn't have a position. You just have to find the natural release. There, now turn that loop toward you, not away. Yes. See how it wants to come loose now. Billy let out a breath of relief as the tangle fell free. How'd you know that? He asked. Nebraska, Evelyn said simply. Farm life teaches you that most knots only look complicated. Give them the right angle, and they solve themselves. Billy saw Cole approaching and went respectfully alert the specific posture that young ranch hands adopted in Cole's presence, half respect and half the instinct of someone who knows they're being evaluated without knowing whether they're passing. But before Cole could speak, Evelyn turned around and met his eyes with that same steady, evaluating look. Your man needed help, she said. I hope you don't mind that I went outside. I was going a little stir-crazy indoors. Your hands, Cole said. Reeves said to rest them. My hands are fine. I wasn't pulling anything, just guiding. She looked at him calmly. I'm not particularly good at staying still when there's work to be done. Billy looked between them with the carefully blank expression of a young man who has learned that the best survival strategy in complicated adult situations is to become temporarily invisible. Cole looked at Evelyn's bandaged hands, then at the fence work that still needed doing, then at the storm-gray sky that showed no signs of releasing any of them today. He made a decision he would have found difficult to explain if asked. Billy, he said, show Mrs. Hart where the supply inventory sheets are kept. She said she knows ranch operations. Let her look over the storm provisions list if she's willing. Billy blinked, then recovered. Yes, sir. Cole turned and walked back toward the far section of fence. Behind him, he heard Billy saying quietly to Evelyn, Ma'am, I've been on this ranch 3 years, and I've never once seen him do that. He didn't hear Evelyn's response, but when he glanced back once briefly, she was looking after him with an expression that was somewhere between curiosity and something quieter than that, something more careful. That evening, Cole came in to find that someone had set the long dining room table for 6. He stopped in the hallway and looked at this for a moment. The dining room table had not been set for more than 2 people, himself and Hank occasionally, when they had operational matters to work through over supper in longer than Cole could precisely remember. 6 places. Actual napkins folded properly. The good dishes that Mrs. Calloway usually kept shelved. Mrs. Calloway herself appeared from the kitchen with an expression of profound satisfaction, which meant she was pleased about something and was daring Cole to object to it. Mrs. Hart asked if it would be all right to invite a few of the men in out of the bunkhouse for supper, the cook said. Seeing as the storm has them stuck and miserable and the bunkhouse stove's been temperamental all day, I told her that was a question for you. Then why isn't she asking me? Because I told her I'd ask, Mrs. Calloway said pleasantly. Can they come in? Cole looked at the table. He thought about the last time that room had held a real supper, not a meeting, not a negotiation, just people eating together. He couldn't land on a specific date. Tell them 6 o'clock, he said. The meal that followed was the strangest 2 hours Cole Mercer had spent in recent memory. Hank came, and Billy, and 2 of the older hands, Ruiz, and a taciturn man named Peterson, who'd been at Blackstone Ridge since the beginning, and spoke about 15 words a day when he wasn't working. And Evelyn, who sat at one end of the table with Mrs. Calloway on her right, and the ease of someone who had grown up sharing tables with working people. She asked Ruiz about his family in New Mexico. She asked Peterson what the worst winter he'd ever worked through was, which produced from Peterson a story about a blizzard in Wyoming in '79 that turned out to be the longest sustained sentence anyone at that table had heard from the man, and which he delivered with great seriousness while Evelyn listened with her full attention. She told 2 stories of her own, both funny, both self-deprecating, both about the kind of specific agricultural disasters that only people who've actually worked land find genuinely hilarious. Ruiz nearly choked on his dinner laughing at one of them. Cole sat at the other end of the table and watched all of this and said very little. After supper, when the hands had gone back to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Calloway had retreated to her room, Hank lingered at the table with the last of his coffee. Cole was stacking dishes, a thing he never did, but his hands needed something to do. She's remarkable, Hank said. She's a traveler. Cole said. She'll move on when the storm breaks. Maybe. Hank, I'm just noting that she set a table in this house that hasn't been properly set in 6 years, and Peterson talked for 5 minutes straight, which I believe is a record. Hank looked at his coffee. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just treated people like they were worth talking to. Cole said nothing. You've been watching her all evening, Hank said. I watch everyone in my house. Not the way you've been watching her. Hank stood up and put on his coat. 6 years is a long time, Cole. You said that already. I'll probably keep saying it. Hank picked up his hat. She told Peterson she's been on the road for nearly 2 months, alone. No family, no help. Most people would have given up. He paused at the door. She didn't. He left. Cole stood in the empty dining room and looked at the table that 6 people had sat around for 2 hours, and the feeling that produced in him was one he had not been prepared for. Not sentimentality. He was not a sentimental man. Something more structural than that. Like looking at a wall you'd built for protection, and suddenly being unable to remember clearly which side of it you'd meant to stand on. He heard footsteps on the stairs. Evelyn coming down, probably heading back to the kitchen for something. He should go back to his office. There was work. There was always work. He didn't move. She appeared in the doorway and stopped when she saw him. I was going to get some water. I'll be quick. Take your time, he said. And then before he could stop himself, why did you do that? The supper. Evelyn leaned against the door frame. Honestly, because I walked past this room this morning, and it smelled unused. Like good furniture that nobody sits on. And your cook mentioned that the men spend the storms cooped up in the bunkhouse with bad ventilation and card games that lead to arguments. She shrugged slightly. People eat better when they eat together. Keeps the darkness at bay a little, that's all. You did it like you'd been running this house for years. I ran a house for years, she said. Then something closed slightly in her expression. For a while. Cole looked at her. Your husband. A pause. Yes. He didn't push further. He recognized the specific shape of that silence, the kind that surrounds something a person carries without letting anyone see the weight of it. He knew that silence well. He lived inside a version of it every day. The storm should break by morning, he said. Evelyn nodded. Then I'll be out of your way. I didn't say it as a hint. She looked at him quietly. I know you didn't. A beat. Mr. Mercer, can I ask you something? You can ask. All those women they send to you, the senator's daughters and the banker's nieces. She watched him. Is it that you don't want a life with someone, or is it that you're afraid of what happens when you want it, and it doesn't last? The question arrived with no cruelty, entirely honest. The kind of direct that only people in genuine trouble allow themselves because they have stopped spending energy on social performance. Cole looked at her for a long time. Go get your water, he said. Get some rest. He walked back to his office. He sat at his desk. He did not open the ledgers. Outside, the Montana storm pressed against the walls of the largest house in the Northern Territory. And inside that house, Cole Mercer sat alone in the middle of a silence that for the first time in 6 years didn't feel quite the same as it had the morning before. He couldn't name what was different. He wasn't ready to try, but the feeling was there, and it didn't go away. Oh. The storm broke just before dawn, the way Montana storms often do, without ceremony, without apology, as if the sky simply decided it had made its point and moved on. Cole was already awake when the wind dropped. He stood at the window of his back room and watched the silence settle over the land, and the first thing he thought was not about the fences or the cattle or the pipes that needed checking. The first thing he thought was that Evelyn Hart no longer had a reason to stay. He was at the stables by 5:30. Hank found him there an hour later, which meant Hank had gone looking. She's still here, Hank said without preamble. I know. Mrs. Calloway's feeding her breakfast, and they've been talking for an hour straight. I don't think Mrs. Calloway has talked that much since her sister visited in '84. Cole didn't respond to that. He kept his hands on what he was doing, checking the shoe on the bay mare that had been walking uneven since yesterday. The shoe was fine. He'd known that before he started checking it. "The road east will be passable by mid-morning," Hank said. "I know that too." Hank was quiet for a moment. "She asked me last night how far it was to the next town west. Not east. West." Cole's hand stopped for just a half-second, then continued. "What did you tell her?" "Told her about 40 miles in good conditions. She said that was fine." Hank paused. "She's got no horse, Cole. And no money if I had to guess. 40 miles west in December is not fine." Cole stood up. He turned around and looked at Hank with an expression that Hank read correctly and said nothing further about. When Cole walked into the kitchen, Evelyn and Mrs. Calloway went quiet, the way people do when they've been talking about someone who just walked in not guiltily, but with the particular silence of a conversation that has reached a natural resting point. "Good morning," Evelyn said. "The road east opened," Cole said. "If you're heading back toward Billings, Thomas can take you this morning." Evelyn set down her coffee cup. "I'm not heading east. 40 miles west in your condition. My hands are fine? You have no horse." "I'm aware of that." "And no money." He said it plainly without cruelty. Just fact, meeting fact. Something moved through her expression, not humiliation, which surprised him, but something more like recognition. Like a person who has been found out and has decided not to spend energy pretending otherwise. "That's correct," she said quietly. Mrs. Calloway made herself suddenly very busy at the stove, which was her way of being present without being present. Cole pulled out the chair across from Evelyn and sat down. This was not a thing he did sit at his own kitchen table during working hours for a conversation. The chair across from her recognized this by making a small sound of surprise. "Mrs. Hart," he said, "I need two things from you right now, the truth about where you're actually going, and the truth about what you're running from. Because I don't send people west into nothing, and I'm not going to let you walk 40 miles into a Montana winter on a broken plane." Evelyn looked at him for a long time. Long enough that Cole almost added something which would have been the wrong move, and he knew it, so he didn't. "My husband died 14 months ago," she said finally. "His name was Robert Hart. He was a good man who made one bad decision and then couldn't find his way back from it." She paused. "He invested everything we had, the farm, the savings, everything into a land scheme run by his brother Victor. Victor told him it was legitimate. It wasn't. When the scheme collapsed and the debts came due, Robert—" She stopped. Reset. "Robert couldn't face it. He couldn't face me. He couldn't face the morning, so he didn't." The kitchen was very quiet. "I'm sorry," Cole said. And he meant it the way a person means it when they know sorry is insufficient and say it anyway because silence would be worse. "Victor came to me 3 weeks after the funeral." Evelyn continued her voice. Even now, the way a person's voice gets, even when they've told a story enough times to stop drowning in it. "He told me Robert had signed over the rights to the farm as part of the debt settlement, which was partly true. But Victor had manipulated the paperwork, added provisions that didn't exist in the original agreement. He told me I owed him money, personal debts, things Robert had supposedly borrowed that he'd never actually borrowed." Her jaw tightened slightly. Then he said there was a way to settle it without going to court. Cole said nothing. He waited. "He wanted me to marry him," Evelyn said. "Victor Hale, my husband's brother, so he could consolidate the property claims and make the whole mess disappear with one signature." She looked across the table directly at Cole. "I told him I'd see him in hell first." Cole studied her face. "And then you left." "Not immediately. I tried to fight it through the county clerk's office. I had the original paperwork, some of it. Enough to show that the provisions Victor claimed existed weren't in Robert's handwriting. But Victor has connections I don't have money to match. The county clerk told me it would be a long process and expensive, and I should think carefully about whether I had the resources for it." She paused. "I didn't. So yes. Then I left." "Where were you going?" Cole asked. "Actually," Oregon Territory. I have a cousin in Portland who wrote me 2 years ago about land opportunities there. I've been trying to get to her." Something almost like humor touched her expression, tired and self-aware. "It's taken longer than expected." Cole sat back. He looked at the table for a moment, the same table where 6 people had eaten supper the night before, where Peterson had talked for 5 minutes straight, where something had shifted in the air of this house that he didn't have a proper name for yet. "Stay," he said. Evelyn blinked. "I need a hand with the supply inventory before spring operations begin. Mrs. Calloway can't manage the household accounts on top of her other work, and I've been putting off reorganizing the records since August." He kept his voice level, practical. "It's not charity. It's work. Honest pay. You can stay in the guest room, take your meals with the house, and when spring comes and the roads are better, you'll have enough to finish your trip properly." Evelyn looked at him. He could see her working through it, not the offer itself, but the reasons behind it, looking for strings the way a person does who has learned that generosity sometimes costs more than struggle. "Why?" she asked. "I told you. I need Mr. Mercer." Her voice was gentle but firm. "Why?" He looked at her. He chose honesty over deflection, which was not his natural instinct, but felt in this specific moment like the only currency she'd accept. "Because you're going to get yourself killed on that road," he said. "And that would bother me." A pause. "All right," Evelyn said. "I'll stay." What followed in the next 3 weeks was something that Cole Mercer could not have predicted and did not know how to categorize. Evelyn Hart did not tiptoe around his ranch. She did not make herself small in the way guests usually did, the way people do when they're conscious of not belonging, of taking up space that isn't properly theirs. She moved through Blackstone Ridge with the quiet, purposeful energy of someone who knows what work looks like and walks toward it without being asked. She reorganized the supply inventory in 4 days, which should have taken 2 weeks. When Cole looked at what she'd done, the reclassified categories, the cross-referenced records, the waste analysis that showed exactly where the ranch had been hemorrhaging small amounts of money for years, in ways that individually seemed insignificant, and collectively added up to a number that made Cole's jaw tighten. He stood in the supply room for a full minute, just looking at it. He found her that afternoon showing Billy Marsh and one of the other young hands how to properly pack a wound on a horse that had caught its leg on the ice. She wasn't squeamish. She wasn't performing helpfulness. She just knelt down in the cold and talked the boys through it like it was the most natural thing in the world, because for her, it apparently was. "Where did you learn this?" Billy asked her. "Farm," she said. "Same place I learned everything useful." She looked at the horse's leg. "Animals trust you when you're calm. They can feel your heart rate, so whatever you're feeling, you have to find the steady place inside it and operate from there." She glanced at Billy. "Works on people too, for what it's worth." Billy looked at her with the expression of a very young man who has just been told something true by someone who knows what they're talking about. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Cole, watching from across the yard, turned away before she could see him. He told himself firmly that what he was noticing was simply competence. Competence was something he respected. It was arguably the thing he respected most in the world. Evelyn Hart was competent. That was all. But that evening, when he walked past the room that had been locked for 6 years, the master bedroom with Clara's intended furniture still inside, he stopped. He stood outside the door for the first time in years. He didn't touch the handle. He just stood there. Then he walked away. He didn't tell himself why he'd stopped. He was aware that not examining a thing closely doesn't make it not true. He just filed it under matters requiring further review and left it there. It was Hank who broke through his defenses with the bluntness that was Hank's particular gift. They were out riding the eastern fence line on a clear afternoon, the kind of cold blue December day that Montana occasionally offers as an apology for its cruelty, and Hank said without setup, "She told Ruiz that she hadn't laughed in over a year before she got here." Cole kept his eyes on the fence. "Said something about this place, about the people here, felt like the first honest thing she'd been near in a long time," Hank continued. Ruiz told me she said it quiet, like she wasn't planning on saying it out loud. Ruiz talks as much as Reeves, Cole said. Yes, sir. It's a gift. Hank pulled up his horse at a section that needed his attention. She asked me this morning if you'd always lived alone in that house. What did you tell her? Hank looked at him steadily. The truth. Cole looked away. She doesn't need to know that story. She asked specifically, Hank said, not out of curiosity, out of, I don't know, Cole. Recognition, maybe. Like she was identifying something she understood. Cole said nothing for a moment. Then, fix the fence. But that night, he sat in his office long after the work was done, and instead of the ledgers, he stared at nothing in particular, and the question Evelyn had asked him 2 nights ago circled back. Is it that you don't want a life with someone, or is it that you're afraid of what happens when you want it and it doesn't last? He hadn't answered her. He hadn't answered himself either, not honestly. He'd built the non-answer into the architecture of his daily life so thoroughly that it had started to feel like truth. The next morning, he did something he hadn't done in years. He went to the kitchen before anyone else was up, made coffee, and when Evelyn came downstairs and found him sitting there in the kitchen at the table, without papers or ledgers or any pretense of working, she stopped and looked at him with careful eyes. Sit down, he said. I'll tell you about Clara. She sat. She didn't say anything. She just made the particular kind of space that certain people know how to make, where the room around a confession doesn't feel dangerous, where the person listening isn't preparing their response while you're still talking. Cole told her. Not all of it, but the shape of it, the house, the plans, the February morning, the compromise she'd asked for, the one he couldn't give. He told it without self-pity and without revision. He said it the way a man says something true when he has finally decided that maintaining the armor costs more than being seen. When he finished, Evelyn was quiet for a moment. She wasn't wrong, she said, about what she needed. Cole looked at her. She was wrong about what you should give up to provide it, Evelyn continued. But a woman who knows what she needs isn't wrong for saying so. She was just not the right match for this life. She paused. The wrong answer to a real question. Most people take her side entirely, Cole said. Say I was too rigid. Most people weren't in that room. Evelyn wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. You built this whole place for a family. You've been living in it like a caretaker for 6 years. That's... She stopped. That's a very long punishment for one person's grief. Something in his chest moved. Physically. Like a shift in weight. It's not punishment, he said. What would you call it? He didn't answer. The silence stretched out long enough to become its own kind of answer. Mr. Mercer, Evelyn said quietly, you're not protecting your heart anymore. He waited. You're hiding inside your pain, she said. There's a difference, and I think somewhere underneath all this, she gestured slightly, meaning the house, the walls, the 6 years, all of it, you know that. Cole looked at her across the table. The morning light was coming through the kitchen windows. Somewhere outside the ranch was beginning to wake up. He could hear the distant sounds of the day, starting the horses, the voices of his men. Life continuing with its relentless, indifferent momentum. For the first time in 6 years, Cole Mercer didn't have a defense ready. You're direct, he said finally. Robert used to say I should work on that. He was wrong. Something moved through her expression, surprise maybe, or the particular warmth of being understood unexpectedly. She looked down at her coffee, and for a moment, just a moment, the two of them sat in the kitchen of the house Cole had built for a life that didn't come, and neither of them said anything, and the silence was nothing like loneliness. It was the first week of January when the letter arrived. Cole was in his office reviewing the spring cattle contracts when Hank came in with an expression Cole had never seen on him before. Careful. Alert. The expression of a man carrying information he doesn't know how to put down gently. Letter came with the supply rider, Hank said. It's addressed to Mrs. Hart. He paused. But it was opened. Cole looked up. What? Already opened when it arrived. The rider said it came through the main postal station in Billings, passed through 3 hands before it got here. Hank set it on the desk. I wouldn't have read it, Cole, but it was open, and I saw the name on the top. Cole looked at the letter. Then he read it. It was from a man named Victor Hale. The language was legal and precise, and extremely threatening. It informed Evelyn that she had outstanding obligations under the debt settlement of the Robert Hart estate. It informed her that her departure from Nebraska constituted abandonment of legal process. It informed her that a warrant for her arrest on charges of property fraud could be filed at any time. And it told her in language that was careful enough to be deniable, but clear enough to be terrifying that if she returned and settled the matter privately, meaning married him, all of it would disappear. He had found her. He knew she was in Montana. The letter was addressed to Blackstone Ridge specifically. Cole read it twice. Then he set it down on his desk very carefully, the way a man sets down something he would prefer to throw. "Get Evelyn," he said. Hank was already going. She came in 2 minutes later and read the letter standing up. Cole watched her face while she read it. He'd expected fear, the reflexive fear that a document like that is designed to produce. What he saw instead was something worse. He saw the exhaustion of a person who has been fighting the same enemy for over a year and has gotten very tired, not of fighting, but of how much strength it takes. She set the letter down. "How did he know I was here?" she asked. "The postmaster in Billings." Cole's voice was steady. "Rider network talks. Someone saw you traveling this direction. It wouldn't have been hard to narrow down where you ended up in a storm." Evelyn looked at the letter. "He's going to come." "Yes. When he does, he's going to cause problems for you. He'll bring lawyers, he'll bring whatever connections he has, and he'll use this ranch as leverage." She looked up at Cole. "I should go. I should leave before—" "You're not going anywhere," Cole said. She stared at him. "Victor Hale doesn't walk onto my property and threaten the people on it," Cole said. "That's not how things work here." He stood up from the desk. "I want you to tell me everything. The original paperwork, the provisions he claimed, the names of the officials he has in his pocket back in Nebraska. Everything. We're not running from this. We're going to be ready for it." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. Not relief exactly. Something deeper. The particular look of a person who has been carrying something alone for so long that the offer of help doesn't register as relief, but as revelation. Like realizing the weight was never supposed to be carried alone. "Cole," she said, for the first time, "not Mr. Mercer." He looked at her. "Why?" she asked. Same question as before. The only question that actually mattered. He looked back at her steadily. "Because you were right," he said. "About the hiding. And I'm done hiding." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything neither of them said, yet everything that hadn't earned its words, that was too new and too careful to be spoken without first being sure it was real. Outside the office window, the January cold pressed hard against the glass. Somewhere to the east, Victor Hale was reading a response he hadn't gotten yet, planning a move he believed couldn't be stopped. And somewhere inside Blackstone Ridge's walls, something that had been frozen for 6 years was quietly, dangerously beginning to thaw. Hank appeared in the doorway. "Cole," he said, "there's a rider at the gate. Says he's got a message from Senator Whitmore's office. Something about the spring cattle contracts." Cole and Evelyn looked at each other. "Tell him to wait," Cole said. "The next few weeks were going to require everything he had." He could feel it, the shape of what was coming, the way a rancher feels a storm before it arrives. Multiple fronts converging. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and set it on the desk between them. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Tell me everything Victor did. Every name, every date, every document." Evelyn sat down. She straightened her back. And she started to talk. The rider from Senator Whitmore's office was a young man named Graves, thin, overdressed for ranch country, and carrying the particular brand of nervousness that belongs to people who deliver bad news on behalf of powerful men, and hope not to be held personally responsible for it. Cole met him in the front hall. Evelyn stayed in the office. She could hear everything through the thin interior wall, and Cole knew it, and neither of them pretended otherwise. "Senator Whitmore sends his regards," Graves began. "He can keep them," Cole said. "What does he want?" Graves opened his satchel and produced a document with the kind of ceremony that people use when they want the weight of paper to do the threatening for them. "The senator has reviewed the terms of the spring cattle contracts currently held by Blackstone Ridge with the territorial government. He believes there are irregularities in the bidding process from last year that require formal review. Pending that review, the contracts are suspended." Cole took the document. He read it. His expression did not change. "These contracts were awarded through open bid," Cole said. "Standard process. 3 years running. The senator feels the process may have favored Blackstone Ridge unfairly. The senator lost money when his brother-in-law's cattle operation couldn't compete," Cole said flatly. "That's not an irregularity in my process. That's an inadequacy in his." Graves shifted. "Mr. Mercer, the senator has considerable—" "Tell Whitmore his contracts are suspended when my lawyers say they're suspended." Cole handed the document back. "And tell him if he wants to have a conversation about Blackstone Ridge, he can come have it himself instead of sending a boy with paper." He opened the front door. "Good day." Graves left quickly. Cole shut the door and stood there for a moment, his hand still on the latch. Then he turned and walked back into the office. Evelyn was standing beside the desk. She'd heard all of it. "Whitmore," she said. "That's not about the contracts." "No," Cole agreed. "It's not. He knows I'm here. He knows something changed at this ranch." Cole sat down slowly. "Whitmore's been trying to get leverage over Blackstone Ridge's water rights for 3 years. He's never had a pressure point that worked." He looked at her steadily. "Now he thinks he does." Evelyn understood immediately. She didn't flinch from it. "Me. You." She sat down across from him and was quiet for a moment, the way she got quiet when she was thinking hard and honestly rather than performing composure. "So he'll use Victor's claim to paint me as a liability to you, a scandal, a woman of questionable background living under your roof manipulating a wealthy man?" "That's the play," Cole said. "And if you push back, he escalates the contract pressure until it costs you real money." "That's the play," Cole said again. She looked at him with eyes that were clear and angry and not remotely defeated. "Cole, these are powerful men with long reach. Victor alone I can manage. Victor and a sitting senator together. Together they made the mistake of moving at the same time," Cole said. "Which means they've been talking to each other, and that conversation is going to leave a trail." He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. "I need to send 2 letters tonight. One to my attorney in Helena. One to a man I know at the Billings Gazette." He paused. "You said Victor manipulated the original estate paperwork. You said you still have some of the original documents." "In my bag. What's left of them?" "Get them." She was already moving. While Evelyn went upstairs, Cole sat alone for exactly 30 seconds and allowed himself to acknowledge privately and without dramatics that this situation had become something larger than a woman in trouble and a man with resources. Whitmore didn't move on people unless he believed they were exposed, which meant someone had told him Cole was exposed, which meant someone on or near this ranch had been talking to the senator's people. That thought settled into him cold and stayed there. Hank appeared in the doorway. "The rider gone." "Gone." Cole looked at him. "Who knew Mrs. Hart was here before the supply rider came?" Hank's eyes sharpened. "You think someone talked?" "Whitmore moved inside 48 hours of that letter arriving." "That's not coincidence, Hank. That's intelligence." Cole kept his voice level. "I'm not accusing anyone. I'm asking who knew," Hank thought. "Mrs. Calloway, Reeves, Billy Ruiz Peterson, they were all at supper. The supply rider, obviously. And Tom Garrett in town. I had him check road conditions before the storm broke. I mentioned we had a guest." "Tom Garrett," Cole said. Hank's expression changed. "Tom's wife is the senator's cousin's daughter." Yes, Cole said. She is. Neither of them said anything further about that. Cole wrote his letters. Evelyn came back down with a worn leather folder that she'd clearly been carrying for months, pressed flat against the bottom of her bag, protected with an extra layer of oilskin, the way a person protects the only weapons they have. She spread the documents on the desk and walked Cole through them with precision. The original estate agreement in Robert's handwriting, the provisions that appeared in Victor's amended version that didn't exist in the original, the dates that didn't line up the signatures that had been clearly traced rather than signed fresh. Cole looked at all of it without speaking, reading with the focused attention of a man who has spent years reading contracts and knows exactly where the fraud lives. When he looked up, his expression was quiet and certain. "This is enough," he said. "This is enough to destroy him in any honest courtroom in the territory." Victor doesn't operate in honest courtrooms. He doesn't, Cole agreed. But the Billings Gazette does, and so does Judge Harmon in Helena, who has hated corrupt land schemes since the Copper King debacle in '83. He started making notes on the documents. "We're not going to fight this in Victor's arena. We're going to fight it in public." Evelyn stared at him. "If you go public, Whitmore will accelerate everything. You could lose those contracts permanently. That's a lot of money," Cole said. "Yes." "Cole, I know what I'm doing." He looked at her. "Do you trust me?" She held his gaze. It was a real question, and she treated it as one not rushing her answer, actually deciding. "Yes," she said. "I do." "Then let me work." She nodded. And for the first time since arriving at Blackstone Ridge, Evelyn Hart sat back in a chair and let someone else carry the weight for a while. The next 10 days moved fast and brutal. Whitmore's first escalation came through the Cattlemen's Association pressure on 3 other major ranchers to withdraw their joint grazing agreements with Blackstone Ridge. It was a financial squeeze calculated to look like market forces, and obviously not. Cole's attorney, a sharp Helena man named Alcott, arrived within a week and began building the contract defense. Cole gave him the Whitmore correspondence and told him to look for other ranchers who'd been similarly pressured over the past 3 years. Alcott gave him a look that meant he already knew this story and had been waiting for someone with enough standing to tell it properly. The second escalation was social. Stories started circulating in the nearest town. Dillon Creek, 12 miles from Blackstone Ridge, about the mysterious widow living at the Mercer Ranch. The stories were crafted with the particular skill of someone who knows how to be vicious while remaining technically inaccurate. Evelyn had arrived at Cole's door under suspicious circumstances. No one knew her true background. She'd been seen going through the ranch records. Cole Mercer. Everyone knew he was a private man. A careful man was clearly being manipulated by a woman with designs on his fortune. Billy Marsh heard these stories in town and came back furious. "People are saying things, Mrs. Hart," he said, finding Evelyn in the supply room where she was working. "Things that aren't true and aren't fair, and I want you to know that every man on this ranch knows better." Evelyn looked at him steadily. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough." Billy's young face was tight with the indignation of someone who is still at the age where injustice produces pure anger, rather than the more complicated response that experience teaches. Mrs. Aldrich at the dry goods store told Ruiz she wouldn't be doing business with anyone from Blackstone Ridge as long as you were here. Evelyn put down the ledger she'd been holding. "Billy," she said carefully, "what exactly are they saying I've done? That you lied about who you are? That you came here with a plan to—" He stopped. His ears went red. "To secure Mr. Mercer's interest through improper means." The silence that followed was short and sharp. "I see," Evelyn said. "It's not true," Billy said fiercely. "I know it's not true." Her voice was calm, steady. "But that doesn't mean it doesn't do damage." She looked at him. "Billy, does Mr. Mercer know about this yet?" Hank was going to tell him this evening. "Tell him now," she said. "Don't wait for evening." Cole's reaction when Hank told him was not explosive anger. It was something quieter and more dangerous, the kind of cold, focused fury that doesn't waste itself on noise. He sat with it for about 4 seconds. Then he stood up and put on his coat. "Where are you going?" Hank asked. "Dillon Creek." "Cole, I'm going to have a conversation with some people about the difference between information and a lie, and I'm going to have it in person." He looked at Hank. "Don't try to talk me out of this." "I wasn't going to," Hank said. "I was going to ask if you wanted company." They rode into Dillon Creek together. Cole, Hank, Ruiz, and Billy, who had insisted with the quiet stubbornness of someone who has decided what kind of man he wants to be. Cole went directly to the saloon, which was not where he usually went, which meant his arrival produced an immediate shift in atmosphere. The particular charged stillness of a room that realizes something important is happening. He didn't raise his voice. He stood in the middle of the room and addressed the assembled men of Dillon Creek with the directness that had always been his most effective weapon. "I know what's being said about Mrs. Hart," he said. "I know where it's coming from, and I'm going to tell you something that you can take home and think about tonight." He looked around the room steadily. "Evelyn Hart is a widow who lost everything through fraud committed by a man who is currently trying to use her as leverage against me. The stories circulating about her character are manufactured by people who need you to believe them so that you'll be too busy looking at her to look at what they're actually doing." He paused. "Those of you who've done business with Blackstone Ridge for the past 10 years know the kind of operation I run. You know I don't get manipulated by tricks, and you know I don't make decisions I can't stand behind in daylight." He let that settle. "The next man who repeats one of those stories in my hearing is going to explain to me personally where he got it. That's all I came to say." He left. The ride back was quiet until Billy said from behind him, That was something, Mr. Mercer." Cole didn't answer, but Hank caught his eye and gave him a short nod, and Cole looked away before the satisfaction of it could make him less careful than the situation required. Because what he'd done in that saloon had just made everything harder. He knew it. Whitmore would hear about it within 24 hours. Standing publicly behind Evelyn, defending her character with the weight of his name, was not the move of a man who could be pressured into cutting her loose. It was the move of a man who had chosen a side. And Whitmore, who was not stupid, would understand exactly what it meant. The response came faster than Cole expected. 3 days later, Victor Hale arrived in Dillon Creek. Cole found out from Tom Garrett the same. Tom Garrett, who'd talked to Whitmore's people, who had apparently decided that information was a commodity that could be traded in both directions, and had brought Cole this particular piece either out of guilt or calculation. It didn't matter which. The information was real. Victor Hale, in Montana, filing papers with the county clerk's office claiming Evelyn Hart owed debts enforceable across territorial lines, requesting a writ of civil attachment that would require her return to Nebraska for legal proceedings. Cole read the telegraph Alcott sent him and felt the temperature of his anger drop another 10 degrees, which meant it was very cold indeed. He went to find Evelyn. She was in the kitchen teaching 2 of the younger ranch children their letters. The children of a hand who'd had them up from Dillon Creek for the week, and who had somehow, within 20 minutes of their arrival, been pulled into the orbit of Evelyn Hart's patient attention. The older one, a girl of about 8, was sounding out words with great concentration, while her younger brother pressed himself against Evelyn's arm and watched with the unfocused trust of someone very small in a large world. Cole stood in the doorway and looked at this for a moment before she looked up. She saw his expression and knew immediately. "Give me a minute," she told the children gently. She settled the younger one with a picture book and came out into the hall. Cole handed her the telegraph without preamble. She read it. Her face was very still. "He's here," she said. "He filed this morning. A civil attachment." She looked up. "Cole, if he gets a sympathetic magistrate to sign this, they can compel me to go back." "They won't get a sympathetic magistrate," Cole said. "Alcott's already filing a counter-motion. Victor Hale's claim relies on provisions that don't exist in the original document, and we have the original document. Any honest review destroys his case. Victor doesn't need an honest review, Evelyn said. He needs 48 hours of confusion and a compliant official. She was right. Cole knew she was right, and the knowing of it made something rise in him. Not helplessness, which was not an emotion Cole Mercer had much experience with, but its closest cousin. The awareness that the situation was moving faster than even careful preparation could fully manage. "He's going to come here," Evelyn said. "He'll come to the ranch. He'll want to see me in person. Then we'll be ready for him." Cole. She looked at him with the directness he'd come to understand was simply how she was not performance, not strategy, just honesty, moving at its natural speed. "When he comes, and he will come, he won't just threaten me. He'll threaten you. He'll find every angle available. He'll talk to Whitmore if he hasn't already. He'll—" Evelyn. Cole put both hands on her shoulders. It was the first time he'd touched her. She went still, not with fear, but with the particular alertness of contact that means something. "Listen to me. I have been running this ranch for 16 years. I have survived 3 land disputes, a cattle plague, 2 bank crises, and 1 senator's sustained campaign to break my water contracts. I am not afraid of Victor Hale." He held her gaze. "Are you—" She thought about it honestly. He appreciated that she actually thought about it instead of reflexively performing courage. "Not afraid," she said finally. "Tired of him." "Good," Cole said. "Tired is useful. Tired makes people finish things." Something shifted in her eyes. Something that might have been the beginning of a smile, but was steadier than a smile, more certain. "You're a strange man," she said. "So I've been told." "It's not an insult." She looked at him for a moment longer than the conversation required. "What do we do now?" He let go of her shoulders. The absence of the contact was immediately noticeable to both of them, though neither acknowledged it. "Now," Cole said, "you go finish teaching those children their letters, and I'm going to ride to Dillon Creek and personally stand in the county clerk's office while Alcott files every counter-motion we have." He went to put his coat on. "Cole." He stopped. "He's going to say things," Evelyn said, "about me. Things that will be designed to— I know the kind of things he's going to say. Do you—" Her voice was quiet and completely direct. "He's going to say I seduced my husband's brother. He's going to say I had Robert sign over property under duress. He's going to paint me as exactly the kind of woman this territory already wants to believe I am, because it's easier than believing the truth." Cole turned around fully and looked at her. "And if I were a different man," he said, "that might matter." He held her gaze. "I'm not a different man." He walked out. The ride to Dillon Creek took 40 minutes. Alcott was already at the clerk's office. The counter-motion was complex and thorough, and documented with the kind of precision that only happens when a lawyer has been given original evidence instead of reconstructions. But when Cole walked into the clerk's building, he found the clerk a man named Jessup, 20 years in the job. Good reputation, looking extremely uncomfortable behind his desk. Standing across from Jessup was a man Cole had never seen before, but recognized immediately from Evelyn's descriptions. Victor Hale was perhaps 45, built solid, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome once and had gone hard over time. He was well-dressed, too well-dressed for Dillon Creek, which meant he'd come prepared to impress, rather than to actually work. He had a lawyer with him, a man Cole didn't recognize, and he had something else, a second document freshly prepared, which he'd apparently just handed to Jessup. He turned when Cole came in, and he looked at Cole with the particular assessment of a man who has been studying his opponent for months. "Mr. Mercer," Victor said, "I was hoping we'd have the chance to meet." "Were you?" Cole said. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about the situation with my sister-in-law." Victor's voice was smooth, the practiced smoothness of someone who has talked his way past many obstacles and believes words are more reliable than facts. "I don't think you have a full picture of who Evelyn Hart is." "I have a complete picture," Cole said, "including the original estate documents that show your amendment provisions are fabricated." Something moved through Victor's face. Just a flicker. Gone fast. Those documents are incomplete, he said. My attorney can demonstrate. Your attorney can demonstrate whatever you paid him to demonstrate, Cole said. My attorney, on the other hand, has the notarized originals, a forensic analysis of the handwriting discrepancies, and 3 witnesses from the Nebraska County Clerk's office who will testify that the amended provisions were filed 6 weeks after Robert Hart's death, not before. He looked at Jessup. We'll be filing that documentation with you this afternoon. Jessup looked profoundly relieved to have a clear direction to look in. Victor stepped forward. His smooth voice dropped by a register. Mr. Mercer, I understand you have feelings about this situation. A widow alone in distress, any decent man would want to help. But Evelyn has a gift for making men feel that way. It's a skill she's practiced. He looked at Cole with the expression of a man delivering information between men, man to man, outside the hearing of inconvenient truths. She's been using people since before my brother died. I was trying to protect Robert from her for years. Ask anyone back in Nebraska. Ask. I'll stop you there, Cole said. Victor stopped. I've met men like you before, Cole said. You use other people's grief as raw material. You took a dead man's estate and tried to steal it from his widow, and when she wouldn't cooperate, you chased her across half the country with legal threats you manufactured yourself. His voice was completely level. I want you to hear this clearly. You are not going to get what you came for. The documents are going to destroy your claim. And when this is over, the story of what you did to Evelyn Hart is going to be printed in every newspaper that will take it. He picked up his hat. Go back to Nebraska, Mr. Hale. He walked to Alcott's side and started discussing the filing. Victor Hale stood there for a moment. Then his smooth expression closed into something harder and more honest than anything he'd shown so far. He picked up his coat and walked to the door. At the threshold, he stopped. You don't know everything, Mercer, he said. There are things about that woman that will change your mind. I promise you that. He left. Cole kept his eyes on Alcott's documents. File everything today, he said quietly. Don't wait until morning. Alcott nodded. He could feel the temperature in Cole's voice and knew better than to comment on it. Cole rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon. The sky was low and gray and thinking about snow. He moved through the necessary evening work with the focus of a man who needs his hands occupied so his mind can process. He was at the stables when Hank found him. You need to come to the house, Hank said. Now. Something in his tone made Cole put down what he was doing immediately. What happened? Evelyn got a visitor this afternoon, while you were in town. Hank's expression was the careful one, the one Cole had learned meant the information was serious. A woman came from town, said she had a message for Mrs. Hart. Evelyn saw her privately in the front parlor. And Evelyn won't tell me what the message was, Hank said. But Cole, she's been sitting alone in that parlor for 2 hours. Mrs. Calloway tried to go in twice, and she wouldn't open the door. Cole was already walking. He knocked once on the parlor door. No answer. Evelyn? He kept his voice steady. I'm coming in. He opened the door. She was sitting in the chair by the window. She'd been crying not recently, but within the past hour. Her eyes were dry now, but the traces were there, and she was holding a folded piece of paper in both hands, the way you hold something you don't want to put down, because putting it down means deciding what to do with it. She looked up when he came in. Victor talked to a woman in town, she said. Her voice was controlled. A friend of the senator's wife. She came to tell me... She stopped, reset. She came to deliver a message from Whitmore. He knows about Robert, about how Robert died, and he's going to publish it. Cole went still. He's going to print it in the Helena newspaper, Evelyn continued. That Robert took his own life, that I drove him to it, that I had been... Her jaw tightened. That I had been unfaithful to Robert, which is why he lost hope, which is why he made the choice he made. She looked at Cole. None of it is true, not a word of it. But when a senator with newspaper connections says those things in print... She stopped. Cole crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at her directly. Listen to me, he said. Robert Hart died because Victor Hale stole everything he had and lied to him about it for years. That's the truth, and that's the truth we're going to tell. Cole, they'll drag Robert's name through. They'll try. He held her gaze. We're not going to let them. She looked at him with eyes that were exhausted and furious, and still beneath all of it steady. Still fighting. Even now still fighting. They're not going to stop, she said. Whitmore and Victor together, they're going to keep coming until one of us breaks. Then we don't break, Cole said. And in the silence that followed in the gray winter light of the parlor of the house built for a family that hadn't come, Cole Mercer made a decision he hadn't planned and didn't second guess. He reached across and took her hands, both of them bandages long gone now healed, and held them in his, and didn't say anything, because some things are communicated more honestly without words. Outside, the first new snow of the week was starting to fall, and in a hotel room in Dillon Creek, Victor Hale was writing a letter to Senator Whitmore, and the letter contained 2 words that would change everything I know. The 2 words in Victor's letter I know turned out to refer to something Cole had not anticipated. Alcott brought the information 2 days later, riding hard from Helena, with the expression of a man who has discovered that the fire is larger than originally mapped. He came straight into the office without removing his coat, which told Cole everything about the urgency before a word was spoken. Victor Hale has been in contact with Whitmore for longer than we thought, Alcott said. Not days, months, since October, possibly earlier. And what Victor has isn't just the debt claim against Mrs. Hart. He set a document on the desk. He has a witness, a former ranch hand named Delacroix, who worked Blackstone Ridge for about 4 months in '85. Delacroix is prepared to testify that during his time here he personally observed. Alcott paused with the careful hesitation of a lawyer choosing exact words. What he describes as a pattern of financial irregularities in Blackstone Ridge's cattle contract reporting. Cole looked at him. That's a lie. I know it's a lie, Alcott said, but Delacroix left this ranch under bad circumstances. He was fired for stealing grain and selling it to a competitor, Cole said. Hank handled it. We have the records. Then we need those records today, because Whitmore's people filed a formal complaint with the Territorial Cattle Commission this morning citing Delacroix's testimony. They're requesting an audit of Blackstone Ridge's government contracts going back 4 years. Alcott looked at Cole steadily. Cole, I want to be honest with you. This is an orchestrated attack on multiple fronts simultaneously. The debt claim against Mrs. Hart, the contract irregularity allegation, and he picked up a second document, this morning's edition of the Helena Courier. He set the newspaper on the desk. Cole picked it up. He read the relevant section once. He set it down without visible reaction, which cost him more than Alcott would ever know. The article was written carefully enough to avoid actionable libel while delivering maximum damage. It described in the language of concerned civic journalism the presence of a mysterious widow at the Mercer Ranch whose background was unclear and whose influence over the territory's wealthiest cattlemen had prompted questions from community leaders. It mentioned obliquely that the widow's late husband had met an unhappy end under circumstances that had never been fully examined. It quoted an unnamed source describing Evelyn Hart as a woman with a history of attaching herself to men of means. Not a single direct accusation. Every sentence calibrated to do its work and leave no fingerprints. This is Whitmore's writing, Cole said. His editors. Alcott agreed. But his money. Cole stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room for about 10 seconds. Alcott had the good sense to stay quiet. I want everything, Cole said finally. Every contract record, every payroll document, every grain inventory from the past 4 years on Alcott's desk by tomorrow morning. We're going to give the Audit Commission more documentation than they know how to read. He turned around. And I want you to file a defamation suit against the Courier today. Alcott blinked. That process takes... I know how long it takes. File it anyway. I want Whitmore to know we're not absorbing this quietly. Cole picked up his hat. The Audit Commission who chairs it. Commissioner Reed. Reed owes me a conversation, Cole said. 3 years ago, I testified on his behalf when the Copper Syndicate tried to pull his certification. He knows I don't exaggerate and I don't fabricate. He was already moving. Set up a meeting. Cole. Alcott's voice stopped him at the door. There's one more thing. He paused. The article mentions Mrs. Hart by full name. Her maiden name as well. Evelyn Grace Sutton, formerly Hart. He looked at Cole carefully. If Victor has her full identity in the public record, anyone who wants to find her now can. Cole looked at him for a long moment. Then we'd better finish this before anyone else tries. He went to find Evelyn. She'd already seen the newspaper. Mrs. Calloway had tried to intercept it and had failed, which meant Evelyn had read it at the kitchen table before anyone could prepare her for it. When Cole found her, she was in the supply room, not working, just standing with the stillness of someone who has taken a hard blow and is deciding whether to fall or fight. She turned when he came in. Her chin was up. Her eyes were clear. Say what you need to say, she told him. I filed a defamation suit this morning, Cole said. Against the paper and against whoever their unnamed source is, which we both know is Whitmore's office. Alcott's building the case. She stared at him. You what? Also, I'd like to know your maiden name, he said. I knew your husband's name, but I didn't know yours before Hart. Something shifted in her face, surprised into softness for just a moment before she gathered herself back. Sutton, she said. Evelyn Grace Sutton. My father was a schoolteacher in Ohio. Good, Cole said. That's information. We work with information. He looked at her steadily. I need you to trust me through the next 2 weeks. Can you do that? What are you planning? I'm going to give them the audit they asked for, Cole said. Every record, every contract, every penny of every transaction Blackstone Ridge has conducted in 4 years. I'm going to give it to them so thoroughly and so cleanly that Delacroix's testimony reads like what it is, a paid fiction. He paused. And while we're doing that, Alcott is going to be building something else. What something else? Whitmore has been doing this for years, Cole said. Not just to me. 3 other ranchers in the territory have received similar pressure contract suspensions, audit threats, social campaigns against their reputations. I've been hearing the stories for 2 years and letting them be other people's problems. He looked at her directly. That was a mistake I'm correcting now. I've sent letters to all 3. 2 have already responded. When the Billings Gazette runs the full story of what Whitmore has been doing across this territory, the audit commission and the contract complaint disappear. Because Whitmore can't survive public scrutiny of his actual record. Evelyn studied him. You've been planning this for days. Since the first writer arrived from his office, Cole said. I just needed Alcott to confirm the scope. She was quiet for a moment. Cole, this isn't just about me anymore. You're going to war with a sitting senator. I've been at war with Whitmore for 3 years, Cole said. The difference is that now I have a reason to finish it. He held her gaze, and neither of them pretended the reason was purely strategic. Are you with me? She looked at him. And then finally fully, the last of the defensive posture left her body, replaced by something that was neither relief nor surrender, but the genuine thing beneath both of them. Trust freely chosen with full knowledge of the cost. Tell me what to do, she said. What followed was the most concentrated 2 weeks of work Cole Mercer had done since building the ranch itself. Evelyn took the original estate documents and worked with Alcott's junior associate to create a complete forensic timeline of Victor's fraud. Every date, every signature, every filing cross-referenced against the official Nebraska court records that Alcott had subpoenaed through a colleague. She worked 16-hour days without complaint, and the precision she brought to it, the farm woman's habit of keeping detailed records, the sharp intelligence that had been running on survival mode for over a year and was finally running on something better, proved more valuable than any of them had anticipated. On the 4th day, she found something none of them had looked for. She came to Cole's office at 9 in the evening with a document in her hand and an expression that was equal parts grim and electric. Victor filed the original debt claim in Nebraska 3 days before Robert died. she said. She put the document on the desk. I missed it before because the filing date was in a different section from the claim itself. But look, she pointed. He filed the legal claim while Robert was still alive, which means he wasn't responding to Robert's death. He was preparing for it. Cole looked at the date, then looked at her. He knew Robert was going to die, she said quietly. He didn't just take advantage afterward. He knew beforehand. Which means the pressure he put on Robert, the debt calls the false accounting, was deliberate, Cole said. He manufactured the desperation. He drove Robert to it, Evelyn said. Her voice was completely steady, but her hands were not. They were pressed flat against the desk, holding still by force of will. He did it on purpose. And then he came to collect. The silence in the office was the kind that follows something terrible being confirmed. Cole stood up. He came around the desk and stood beside her and looked at the document, and then he looked at Evelyn's hands pressed flat against the wood, and he put his own hand over both of hers. She didn't pull away. She turned one hand over and held on. This changes everything, Cole said quietly. This isn't civil fraud anymore. This is criminal conspiracy. In Nebraska, she said. We'd have to. Alcott has a colleague in the Nebraska bar, Cole said. And this document goes to the Billings Gazette tomorrow, along with everything else. He looked at her. Evelyn, this is it. This is the thing that ends him. She absorbed that. She breathed. And then something moved through her face that was not celebration. It was too complicated for celebration, too tangled up with grief for a man who had been maneuvered into hopelessness by his own brother. But it was resolution. The specific settling of a person who has finally found solid ground after a very long time in deep water. All right, she said. Let's end it. The Billings Gazette ran the story on a Thursday morning in late January. Cole's friend at the paper, a veteran editor named Patterson, who had been looking for a clean angle on Whitmore's corruption for 2 years and had nearly given up, ran it across 4 columns on the front page. Not sensational, thorough, documented. The kind of journalism that lands not like an explosion, but like a very heavy door closing on a very small room. It detailed Whitmore's 3-year campaign of economic pressure against Montana ranchers who refused his terms on water rights and grazing concessions. It named the bribed officials, the falsified audit requests, the social campaigns manufactured against business rivals. It named Delacroix and printed the documentation of his dismissal from Blackstone Ridge in 1885 for theft, making his paid testimony self-evidently worthless. And in the final section, the section that Cole knew would hit hardest, it detailed Victor Hale's scheme in full. The fraudulent amendments, the manufactured debts, the pre-filed legal claim, the 3 days between Victor's filing and Robert Hart's death. Patterson had added one line that Cole hadn't written and hadn't asked for. Patterson had added it because he was a good journalist, and good journalists know where the moral weight actually lives. The line read, "A widow fleeing manufactured criminal charges has found in the words of those who know the Blackstone Ridge operation, not exploitation, but the first honest shelter she has had in over a year." Cole read that line and didn't say anything about it, but he read it twice. The reaction was not immediate. Major stories never land all at once. They arrive in waves, the first wave being the people who read newspapers early and talk fast, the second being the institutions that can't afford to be on the wrong side of a documented public record. The first wave hit within 48 hours. Commissioner Reed came to Blackstone Ridge personally. He arrived unannounced on a Friday morning, which told Cole the man was rattled enough to skip the formalities, and he sat down in the office and said, "The audit request is withdrawn. I want you to know it was filed without my authorization." Cole looked at him. "I know that, James. I should have caught it sooner." Reed looked uncomfortable with this truth, but was saying it anyway, which was to his credit. "This thing with Whitmore, how long has it been going on?" "His water rights campaign, 3 years that I know of. Longer before that, probably." Reed shook his head. "The commission is going to want a full review." "Tell the commission they're welcome to every document I have," Cole said. "All of it is clean and always has been." Reed left looking 10 years older than when he'd arrived. The second wave was the banks. The three financial institutions that had received Whitmore-connected pressure to slow or freeze Blackstone Ridge's operating credit reversed their positions within a week, each sending formal letters that achieved the remarkable linguistic feat of apologizing without using the word apology. Cole read all three letters, set them in a file, and did not allow himself the satisfaction of throwing them away because they might still be useful. The third wave was the other ranchers. Collins arrived first, a big, quiet man from the southern range who had been losing the Whitmore War in silence for 2 years and had been waiting for someone with enough standing to make the first public move. He came to the ranch on horseback and shook Cole's hand in the front hall and said simply, "Took long enough. What do you need from me?" Patterson needed affidavits. Collins gave 3. Before the end of the week, 2 more ranchers had done the same. Whitmore's empire didn't collapse dramatically. It crumbled the way things built on bad foundations crumble progressively, each failing piece exposing the next failure beneath it. His reappointment to the Senate Commerce Committee was quietly blocked. 2 of his backed officials in the territorial government resigned. The social campaign against Evelyn simply stopped the way a fire stops when you take away its fuel. The stories losing credibility so fast that the people who had repeated them began developing selective amnesia about having done so. Mrs. Aldrich at the dry goods store told Ruiz she'd always thought the whole business had been exaggerated. Ruiz told this to Evelyn with barely concealed outrage. Evelyn laughed the first real full laugh Cole had heard from her, the kind that comes from somewhere genuinely surprised by humor. It was a good laugh, unguarded and honest. Cole was crossing the hallway when he heard it and stopped walking. He stood there in the hallway listening to Evelyn laugh in his kitchen, and something happened in his chest that he didn't try to name or manage. He just stood there and let it be whatever it was. Victor Hale left Montana the day after a Nebraska Attorney General's inquiry was formally opened into his conduct. He didn't say goodbye to anyone. He didn't file any further legal claims. He simply disappeared from the Dillon Creek Hotel where he'd been staying, leaving behind an unpaid bill and several letters that the hotel owner with considerable public spirit delivered directly to Patterson at the Gazette. Patterson printed the relevant portions. Victor Hale did not recover his reputation. Not in Nebraska, not anywhere in the territories, not in any place the story reached. Cole heard several months later that he'd moved east to try to start over. He didn't think about Victor Hale much after that. Some endings don't require monitoring. It was a Sunday morning in mid-February when the thing that had been building for weeks finally arrived at its natural conclusion. Cole had gone down to the kitchen early, as had become his habit. The backroom isolation that had defined his mornings for 6 years had given way without formal announcement to early mornings at the kitchen table, with coffee and whatever conversation Evelyn felt like having before the day started properly. They talked about the ranch. They talked about books. They talked about her father's schoolhouse in Ohio, and the particular sound of a Montana winter, and what a person's life actually looks like when you strip away what they thought they wanted and look at what they actually reached for when things got hard. She was already there when he came down, which was unusual. She normally arrived about 20 minutes after him. She was sitting with both hands around her cup, not reading, just sitting, and she had the expression of a person who has made a decision and is waiting for the right moment to say it. Cole poured his coffee and sat down. "I got a letter from my cousin in Portland," Evelyn said. "She has a room for me, whenever I'm ready." She looked at her cup. "The roads will be clear by April." Cole said nothing for a moment. "Is that what you want?" he asked. She looked up at him. "I don't know," she said. And it was the most honest answer she could have given. Cole set down his cup. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for weeks directly, without the deflection he'd spent 6 years perfecting. "I know I'm not an easy man," he said. "I know this ranch is its own kind of hard. I know I spent a long time building walls instead of building something worth protecting. And I know that's not an attractive quality in a person. Cole, let me finish." He held her eyes. "I also know that you are the first person in 6 years who told me the truth about myself without wanting anything back for saying it. And I know that this house—" He paused. This house has been a building I live in for 6 years. It started being a home about 3 weeks after you arrived." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not telling you what to decide. I'm just telling you what's true." Evelyn looked at him across the table. The February light was coming through the kitchen windows. Outside, the ranch was waking up the horses, the voices of the hands beginning their morning work, the sounds of a place that was alive and full, and running on something other than one man's grim determination to survive. "You built this house for someone," she said quietly. "I built it for a life I imagined," Cole said. "The life and the person I imagined turned out to be two different things." He held her gaze. "I've stopped imagining. I'm looking at what's actually here." She was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that Cole sat with it honestly. The full weight of having said it, the complete absence of knowing how it would land, the vulnerability of having opened something that couldn't be unopened. "I'm not the easiest woman either," she said finally. "No," Cole agreed. "You're not. I'll argue with you. You already do. I'll question decisions you've made 10 times over." "You've done that since the second day," Cole said. "And you've been right more than I expected." He paused. "More than I wanted to admit at the time." Something moved through her face, the complicated mix of grief and hope that belongs to people who have lost enough to know that love is not safety, but choose it anyway. "Robert was a good man," she said quietly. "I want you to know that. He wasn't weak. He was broken by something he shouldn't have had to carry alone. I need you to understand that about me, that I loved him and I grieve him, and that doesn't go away." "I know it doesn't," Cole said. "Clara was real to me too. Still is in its way." He held her eyes. "That's not a reason. That's just the truth that's already part of it." Evelyn nodded slowly. Then she looked at him with the directness that was simply who she was, the Nebraska schoolteacher's daughter who'd survived enough to stop wasting time on pretense. "Then I'll stay," she said. "Not because of the roof or the safety or what happened with Victor, but because of this." She gestured between them, meaning all of it, the kitchen table, the early mornings. The truth-telling that had been happening here since a December blizzard brought a stranger to his door. "Because this is the most honest thing I've been near in a very long time." Cole reached across the table. She put her hand in his. Outside, one of the ranch children brought up again for the week, the 8-year-old girl who'd been learning her letters came running through the yard, calling for Mrs. Hart, with the complete unself-conscious joy of a child who assumes the person they want will be there when they arrive. Evelyn's eyes went to the window. She looked at the child. Then she looked at Cole. He was already looking at her. "Go on," he said, quietly, warmly, with the expression of a man who has stopped being afraid of what he wants. She squeezed his hand once, then stood and went out into the February morning to meet the running child with her arms open. Cole sat at the kitchen table of the house he'd built and watched through the window, and understood with the full-bodied certainty of something long overdue that whatever he'd been building toward for the past 16 years, whatever all the work and the walls and the empire had actually been in service of, was not what he'd told himself it was. It was this. It had always been this. And a month later, in the smallest church in Dillon Creek, filled edge to edge with ranch hands and townspeople and 2 ranchers who'd driven through mud to be there. Cole Mercer married Evelyn Hart on a Saturday morning in March. The vows were short. They were said by people who had already proven everything the words claimed. When it was done, Hank Briggs, who had said, "I know how long it's been exactly twice," and would carry the credit for that observation for the rest of his life, stood in the back of the church and looked at his boots and cleared his throat in the way men do when they are not going to cry and are working very hard at it. Billy Marsh beside him was making no such effort. 6 years, Hank said quietly. "Worth it," Billy said. Hank looked at the front of the church where Cole Mercer was looking at his new wife, with the expression of a man who has finally laid down something very heavy and discovered with some surprise that his hands are free. "Yes," Hank agreed. "Worth it." Spring came to Blackstone Ridge the way it always did, not gently, not all at once, but in arguments. A warm week followed by a bitter cold snap, then sunshine that actually meant it, then mud that tried to swallow the lower fence posts whole. Cole had seen 30 springs on this land, and he still loved the argument of it, the way Montana refused to let anything arrive without earning it first. This spring felt different from everyone before it. He noticed it in small things. He noticed it in the fact that he woke up, and the first thing he reached for was not the day's work, but the warmth beside him, which was new enough that it still surprised him every morning in a way that he had no desire to stop being surprised by. He noticed it in the kitchen, where breakfast had become a standing gathering. Hank Billy Ruiz, whoever was nearest crowding around the long table, because Evelyn cooked the way she did everything else with complete attention, and a complete absence of self-consciousness about the pleasure it gave people. He noticed it in the supply room, which now ran with a precision that had saved the ranch more money in 3 months than Cole's previous 5 years of management. He noticed it most in the hallway, outside the master bedroom, which was no longer locked. Evelyn had asked him about it once early in March, 2 weeks after the wedding. She'd stood outside that door and looked at it and looked at him and not said a word, which was its own kind of question. Cole had walked past her, opened the door, and stood in the doorway of a room he hadn't entered in 6 years. It smelled of cedar and old air and time. "We can change whatever you want," he said. Evelyn stood beside him and looked into the room. "What do you want to keep?" He thought about it honestly. "The window faces east," he said. "I always liked that about this room." "Then we keep the window," she said, and walked in like it was simply a room and not a monument to anything. Within a week, it was simply a room. The transformation of Blackstone Ridge in the months following the wedding was not dramatic in any single moment. It accumulated the way real change always does, in decisions that each seemed small until you stood back and saw what they added up to. Cole had been thinking about the land ownership question for 2 years. The idea that the men who worked Blackstone Ridge deserved more than wages for their labor, that the ranch's long-term strength lay in giving its people genuine stake in it. Evelyn had heard him half-articulate this one evening in April, had asked 3 sharp questions that clarified the parts of it he'd been avoiding. And the next morning, Cole had called Alcott about the legal structure. By the end of summer, 6 of his senior hands, Hank among them, though Hank had argued against his own inclusion with such ferocity that Cole had to override him, personally held documented partial ownership in sections of Blackstone Ridge's grazing land. Not charity. Earned equity calculated against years of service and valued at real market rates. Hank had looked at the document for a long time without speaking. "You didn't have to do this," he said finally. "I've been meaning to for 2 years," Cole said. "I just needed someone to ask the right questions." Hank looked at him, then looked at the document again. "She asked you." "She asked me." Hank folded the document carefully. "Cole," he said, "I've known you for 16 years. He stopped. "Don't," Cole said. "I'm going to." "Hank, you're better," Hank said simply. "Not different. Better. Like the actual version of what you were always trying to be." He put the document in his coat. "That's all I wanted to say." He walked out before Cole could respond, which was probably deliberate, and which Cole appreciated. The employment program for widows and struggling families came from Evelyn's suggestion and Cole's backing, and it grew faster than either of them expected. Word spread through the territory the way good news travels quietly person to person, through women who told other women that the Mercer Ranch had work available that paid fairly and treated people decently. By autumn, Blackstone Ridge employed 11 women in various capacities, laundry, kitchen, teaching the ranch children, managing the supply records that Evelyn had systematized and could now be maintained by anyone she trained. The children's education was Evelyn's particular project, and she ran it with the focused determination of her father's daughter. 3 mornings a week in the large room off the main house that had previously functioned as a storage space, and now, didn't she taught reading and arithmetic and the kind of practical science that children who grow up working land can immediately apply to the world around them. Cole came to watch once uninvited. He stood in the doorway and looked at 8 children, arranged in a loose semicircle. All of them engaged with genuine attention. Not the performed attention of children who know. An adult is watching them, but the real kind. And Evelyn in the middle of it, asking questions instead of lecturing, listening to the answers like they mattered, which to her they visibly did. The 8-year-old girl, May, the one who had run across the yard calling for Mrs. Hart back in January, was explaining to the other children how to calculate the feed ratio for a sick horse. She was using the method Evelyn had taught her, and she was completely correct and completely confident. And when she finished, Evelyn looked at her with an expression that made Cole have to look away for a second. He retreated before anyone saw him. That evening he told Evelyn what he'd seen. She listened with the slight furrow between her brows that meant she was really listening and not just preparing her response. "May is remarkable," Evelyn said. "She should have proper schooling, real schooling beyond what I can give her." "We could fund a school in Dillon Creek," Cole said. "A proper one." Evelyn looked at him. "You'd do that. The town has needed one for 15 years, Cole said. "I've been aware of that and have not done anything about it, which I'm not proud of." He looked at her. "You make me less comfortable with things I should have been uncomfortable with all along." "Is that a complaint?" "No," Cole said. "It's an observation." She smiled. Not the small, careful smile she'd arrived with in December, the one she used when she wasn't sure yet how much space she was allowed. The real one. The one that took up the room it deserved. "Then let's build a school," she said. The Dillon Creek School broke ground in June and opened its doors in September with a teacher imported from Helena and 43 enrolled students. Patterson ran a piece about it in the Gazette. Cole declined to be quoted. Evelyn declined with rather more grace and gave Patterson enough material about the children's progress that he had a better story than any quote would have produced. It was a good year, the best Cole could remember. And because he was Cole Mercer and could not let good things simply exist without examining them for structural weaknesses, he spent some portion of every good day half waiting for the thing that would arrive to complicate it. The complication arrived in October on a Tuesday in a form he had not anticipated. Her name was still Clara Whitfield. She'd never married, which Cole learned later from her own account. She was 41 now, which meant she was 41 the same as the rest of them, though Cole's mind had preserved her at 28 for 8 years and was performing the rapid adjustment that the mind does in these situations with limited grace. She came to the ranch on a Tuesday morning and asked for Cole at the front gate. The hand at the gate brought the message to Hank, and Hank, displaying the self-possession that had always been his defining quality, came directly to Cole in the office with an expression that contained neither alarm nor drama. Just information and the careful respect of a man who understands that some news needs to be delivered cleanly. "Clara Whitfield is at the gate," Hank said. Cole looked up from the contract he was reviewing. A silence of about 5 seconds. "All right," Cole said. Evelyn was in the supply room across the hall. The door was open. Cole looked at it for a moment, then walked to the doorway. She was adding inventory figures. She looked up when she heard him stop. He told her in one sentence. Evelyn put down her pencil. She looked at him with eyes that were doing the specific work of measuring something not jealousy, which would have been simpler. Something more honest than jealousy. The work of a person who is looking at the situation in front of them and deciding what they actually believe about themselves and the man they married. "Go talk to her," Evelyn said. "You can come." "I know I can." She picked her pencil back up. "Go, Cole. This is your past. Handle it." He went. Clara was thinner than he remembered. Travel had that effect, and she had the look of someone who had been traveling in the more sustained sense, not across geography, but across time and circumstance, across the distance between who she had been at 28 and who she had arrived at now. She was composed. She was gracious. She was clearly uncertain what she would find, and was managing that uncertainty with the intelligence Cole had always respected in her. They stood in the front hall of the house he had built partly with her in mind. "Clara," he said. "Cole." She looked at him. "You look well." "Thank you. So do you." "I heard about everything. The Whitmore story, the ranch changes the school." She paused. I heard you married. In March. She nodded. Something moved through her face, not regret exactly. Something more honest than regret and harder to name. I came because I owed you a conversation I should have had a long time ago, she said. Not about us. About what I said when I left. Cole waited. I told you that ranch life wasn't enough, Clara said. That this land wasn't a real life. That you were wrong to choose it. She looked at him steadily. I was wrong about that. I've known it for years and I never said it. She glanced around the front hall, the photographs, the books that had migrated from the library to every room because Evelyn read constantly and left evidence the sounds from further in the house that were unmistakably the sounds of a place that was occupied and alive. You built something real here, Cole. You were always building something real. I just couldn't see it. Cole looked at her. He felt none of the things he might have expected to feel in this moment. Not anger, which had burned out years ago. Not grief, which had run its course. Not vindication, which he had always thought he'd want, and now discovered he didn't particularly need. What he felt was something simpler. The clean, settled feeling of a man who is exactly where he should be. Thank you for saying that, he said, and he meant it without complication. Clara looked at him a moment longer. She's changed you, she said. Not made you different. Made you more yourself somehow. She almost smiled. I hope you know how rare that is. I'm starting to, he said. They talked for another 20 minutes, carefully, honestly, with the consideration of two people who had mattered to each other once and were navigating the distance between then and now with adult respect. When Clara left, it was without drama or residue, and Cole stood in the front hall for a moment after the door closed and took inventory of what he found inside himself. Evelyn appeared from the hallway. She had clearly not been listening. She had given him the privacy of the conversation, genuinely, not performatively. But she was here now, and she looked at him with the steady eyes that had been looking at him honestly since December. How was it? She asked. Fine, he said. It was fine. She looked at him carefully. Fine or fine because you don't know how to say something more complicated. He almost laughed. Fine, because it's actually fine, he said. She came to apologize for something that stopped mattering a while ago. He looked at Evelyn. I told you that the life and the person I imagined turned out to be two different things. You did. She was the imagined version, Cole said. You're the real one. He held her eyes. That's not a competition. It's just the truth. Evelyn looked at him for a moment. Then she crossed the hall and put her hand against his chest, flat-palmed the way she did when she wanted to feel that he was actually there and not just saying something. He put his hand over hers. Good, she said quietly. Good. The Montana Cattle Festival that November was the largest Cole had attended in 20 years of operation. It gathered ranchers, merchants, territorial officials, and ordinary families from across the region in Billings for 3 days of trade competition and the kind of social reckoning that frontier communities conduct once a year when they're all in the same place. Blackstone Ridge won the quality breeding competition for the third consecutive year, which pleased Cole professionally and which he acknowledged with the minimum of ceremony, because he found public ceremony uncomfortable and had not entirely resolved this character trait, despite Evelyn's ongoing commentary on it. The public commentary on Evelyn herself at this festival was something Cole had been watching with the satisfaction of a man who has waited a long time for a thing and is finally watching it arrive. The Helena Courier had run a correction buried inadequate but present, and the social campaign against her reputation had dissolved so completely that the people who had participated in it were now apparently unable to remember doing so. People approached her at the festival with the warmth extended to someone who is genuinely liked, and Evelyn received this warmth with the grace of someone who neither holds the previous absence of it against anyone, nor pretends it hadn't existed. On the second evening of the festival, the Cattlemen's Association held its annual gathering dinner. Cole had been asked to speak routine, he'd done it before, and had agreed with his usual economy of enthusiasm for public speaking. He stood at the front of that crowded hall, and looked out at the assembled ranchers and merchants and families and politicians, some of whom had sided with Whitmore, some of whom had been pressured by him, all of whom were watching Cole Mercer. Now, with the attention, due a man who had fought something difficult and won it cleanly, and he set down the prepared remarks Alcott had helped him draft. Then he looked at Evelyn, who was seated at the front table, and was looking back at him with the expression of a woman who has learned to recognize the specific face her husband makes when he is about to do something unrehearsed. She raised one eyebrow slightly. He ignored it. "I had something prepared," Cole said to the room. "I'm going to set it aside." He paused. "Most of you know what this past year has been for Blackstone Ridge. You know about the contract pressure and the audit claims and the campaign run against my ranch and against my wife's character." He kept his voice level and clear. "What you might not know is that none of the things that worked, none of the things that actually held through all of it, were things I built alone." The room was very quiet. Cole looked at Evelyn. "She arrived at my door in a blizzard in December, with nothing but what she could carry, and the kind of honesty that most people lose somewhere along the way to survival." He kept his eyes on her directly. "Everyone assumed she came to Blackstone Ridge needing shelter. And that's true, she did. But what I needed was considerably more than what she was asking for, and she gave it anyway without being asked." He paused. "She told me the truth about myself when nobody else was willing to. She held this operation together at its hardest point with intelligence and precision, and the flat refusal to be smaller than the situation required." He held her gaze across the room. "I built the biggest ranch in the Northern Territory. She made it worth building." The silence held for one more beat. Then Collins started clapping, and after Collins the room followed, and after the room followed, came the specific standing wave of an audience that has recognized something true being said out loud. Evelyn did not cry. She was not a person who cried at the expected moments, which Cole had learned was because she distributed her emotional responses with the same precision she brought to everything else where they were needed, when they were warranted, not for performance. She looked at Cole across the room with eyes that were full without spilling over, and she gave him one slow nod that said, "Everything," a room full of applause couldn't contain. He stepped down from the podium and walked to her through the standing crowd, and when he reached her, she stood up and said quietly, close enough that only he could hear, "You set aside your prepared remarks." "I did." "You hate public speaking." "I do." "Then what was that?" Cole looked at her. "That was the truth," he said. "I'm told it gets easier with practice." She laughed. The real laugh, the unguarded one, the one that had stopped him in the hallway back in March. He thought he would probably never get tired of hearing it. He had no intention of testing that. Hank found them afterward in the quieter air outside the hall, where Cole was getting a moment of recovery from 200 people, and Evelyn was watching the night sky with the contemplative expression of someone who is genuinely at peace. Hank looked at both of them. He had the document, his land equity grant, in his inside coat pocket, where Cole suspected it had been since the day he received it. "Good speech," Hank said. "Don't push it," Cole said. "Good speech," Hank repeated with the satisfaction of a man who has earned the right to say it twice. Billy appeared beside him because Billy had developed the habit of appearing wherever the important moments were, partly by instinct and partly because he had come to understand that important moments were what shaped a man, and he was paying close attention to how that worked. "Mrs. Mercer," Billy said to Evelyn with the formal address that he deployed at significant occasions, "do you think Mr. Mercer will get easier at public speaking?" "No," Evelyn said with complete affection. "That's what I thought." Billy looked at Cole, but it was still good. Cole looked at all three of them, the old foreman with the document in his pocket, the young hand who had grown 3 years' worth of character in the past 12 months, and the woman standing beside him who had walked 12 miles in a blizzard and knocked on the door of a fortress and refused to be intimidated by what she found inside it. He thought about everything he'd been building for 16 years. The contracts, the acreage, the infrastructure, the name that made other men careful. He thought about the man who'd made all of it and lived alone in the middle of it and called the loneliness discipline and the isolation strength and the emptiness simplicity. He thought about what it had taken to understand the difference between surviving and living. It had taken one honest woman and one December storm and the specific courage it requires to open a door you've kept locked for 6 years and let what's on the other side actually reach you. "Let's go home," Cole said. Evelyn put her hand in his. They rode back to Blackstone Ridge in the November dark, the four of them with the stars doing what Montana stars do when the air is cold and clear, burning so close and so bright that the distance seems wrong, that the sky seems smaller than it should be, more intimate, more personal, like something built for exactly the number of people standing under it. The ranch was quiet when they arrived. The hands had left a lamp burning in the kitchen window, which had become a custom. Without anyone deciding it should be, someone always left the lamp, so the house never looked dark when they came home. Cole saw it from the road and felt something in his chest that he had a word for now, that he'd had a word for since March, that he would have told you 6 years ago he'd stopped expecting to feel again. He stopped his horse for a moment and looked at the lit window of the house at the end of the road. Evelyn stopped beside him. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Just looking." She looked at the house, then back at him. She understood because she was Evelyn, and she usually did. They rode the rest of the way home together through the cold Montana night toward the light someone had left burning for them. The cold millionaire cowboy who had rejected every woman-built walls no one could climb and spent 6 years confusing loneliness for strength. That man was gone. Not broken by love, not softened into something lesser, but finally fully and irreversibly complete. Because the truest thing anyone can learn, if they're willing to stop running from it long enough to let it arrive, is this: the life worth building is not the one you protect yourself inside. It is the one you are brave enough to share.